Okay.
Raghavan, maybe you could also tell us what you did, because others might also face the same.
Yeah. So Supratik helped me. It's on the chat.
Okay.
He has put a message on the chat. That's what helped me.
No, the chat was only to you.
I see. Okay, so I had to click on that little arrow next to the mute unmute button in Zoom and go there and choose the right microphone.
Okay.
It was selecting the wrong microphone.
Oh, okay.
There was this little up arrow next to the mute button. I clicked from the drop down list, chose the right one. I apologize for this.
No problem. Can you please share the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, we can see your screen. So the first talk is by Raghavan from IAC Bangalore. The talk is data flow analysis of asynchronous systems using infinite abstract domains. Yeah, you can please start.
Thank you, and I apologize to everybody for the huge delay. So this work is joint work with Snigdha Atayya and K. Narayan Kumar. Oh God, now there is this problem I think somebody faced yesterday. I hit page down, it does not move forward.
I think there is, you have to click using your mouse or something. I faced something.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
It worked. So distributed systems, I'm trying to give a presentation on analysis of distributed systems. So a distributed system consists of a set of processes. In this case, we call them P1 to P4. Each process is like a program, like a single-threaded program, which runs parallelly and independently of the other processes. So they do not execute in lockstep or anything. They each one independently executes, and they communicate via channels by sending messages to each other via FIFO channels. So here is a schematic representation of two processes. Process 1 on the left and process 2 on the right. So I'm showing the control flow graph of each process. Each process has two nodes. The first process has so see, there are two channels. There is one channel in this system. The name of the channel is C1. There is a set of variables that for the system. The system consists of two processes. Now, variables can either be local to a process or they can be global. So in our presentation, for simplicity, we assume that all variables are global, and it's quite easy to accommodate purely local variables as well. So this edge from B to A in the process 1 increments the variable X. So a transition in the process may change the values of any other variables. So I'm just introducing my notation in this slide, basically. This transition from A to B, it sends a message M1 into the channel C1. So the exclamation mark is a send. So this is like usual notation from formal methods community. So there are two messages in this system, M1 and M2, and this is a single channel C1. So for simplicity, we assume a finite alphabet of messages. And the exclamation mark is a send. And in this process, on process 2, there's this edge from C to D, and it says C1 question mark M1. So question mark is a blocking receive. So this transition from C to D is enabled if there is a message M1 at the head of this channel C1. Whereas if the head of the channel C1 does not contain M1, this transition is not enabled and it will block. So now it is normally very undecidable, actually not very difficult, but undecidable to analyze systems that use unbounded queues. So one of the common abstractions proposed in the community is to replace queues by counters. So what we do is for each channel comma message pair, we introduce a counter. And we abstract the channel operations using counter operations. So in this case, there is one channel and two messages. So we have two counters. So the number of counters is normally the product of the number of channels and the number of messages. So here we have just 2 messages in one channel. So we have 2 counters. The first counter corresponds to message M1 and the second counter to message M2. So is my cursor visible?
Yes, yes. We can see your cursor.
Okay, thank you. So this, whenever you send a message, it corresponds to a increment of that counter. So M1 is the first counter corresponds to M1. So the send of the message becomes an increment. So 1 means +1. And since the message M2 is neither read nor written in this transition, the M2 position has a 0. And in this case, this edge is reading or looking up, popping a message M1 from the channel C1. So there is a -1 in the M1 position and a 0 in the M2 position because it is not sending or receiving M2. So in this way, this right side is an abstraction of the left side. Now we will look at the semantics of the system. So it's basically 2 processes. It is like a cross product semantics, but in any one step, one of the processes moves forward. Both processes do not move forward at the same time. And we use the count abstraction to abstract the channel. We don't actually keep track of the channel content, but only the counts of the messages. So initially the state is in A, C, because A and C are the entry states. The value of X is 0 and both the counters are 0. The blue color here shows the current values of both the counters. Now let us say process 2 wants to move forward. The state would be A comma D because process 1 is still in A and process 2 is moving from C to D. This, the count increment decrement is -1 comma 0. So this would be the new values of the counters here, because from 0 0 you apply the increment -1 comma 0. Now this is an infeasible transition because a negative counter value is not allowed, because you cannot read more messages than you have sent so far. That is an infeasible transition. So anytime a path hits a negative counter value, that last edge is not feasible. So we are now defining the semantics of what all transitions are allowed in this system. Right? So negative values represent infeasible transitions. On the other hand, so let us consider this other state BC, where process 1 is in B and process 2 is in C. And let us say the count configuration is 1 comma 1, right? And so now this actually represents in the underlying system a channel where there is one M1 and one M2, the channel, but we don't know which one is first. So if M2 was in the head of the channel, then this transition C to D cannot be taken because C to D wants to receive an M1. But we don't know that, so we allow this transition. And the net counters become 0 comma 1. So I can't go into too much details, but all told, the effect of this abstraction is that the abstract system allows a superset of traces as the original system. It can allow some traces which are not allowed in the original system, but it will never allow, it will never miss any trace that the original system supported. So it is a superset of the traces of the original system. Therefore, any conservative property you check on this abstraction, if you find that the property holds, it will still hold in the underlying system, but not the opposite. If a property is false in this system, it may actually be true in the underlying system. So in a sense, this is a conservative check. But this abstraction is required to make algorithms decidable. So this transition is feasible in the abstracted system, but was actually infeasible in the original system. Was possibly infeasible in the original system. So some infeasible traces can get included due to the abstraction. But this is standard in the literature, this abstraction. So I'll introduce some more terminology. So now that we have these two processes, we can construct a product system, and we call this the VCFG. So each process has its own control flow graph, but we now create a combined control flow graph of both the processes, where each node here corresponds to a pair of nodes on the left side. And each edge here corresponds to one edge on the left side. So this So here, since A is moving to B and C is not moving, this corresponds to this transition. So that's why the 1, 0 is carried over here. And this is not changing any of the variables. Its action was identity. So the same identity carries over. And similarly, we have all the other edges. Basically, each edge here corresponds to one of the edges in one of the processes on the left side. And this corresponds to the control flow graph of the entire system. Now, it can be seen rather easily that any interleaving of execution of the two processes on the left side corresponds to a path on the right side, on the product system. And as discussed before, some of these paths may be feasible and some may be infeasible. So this path is feasible because you are incrementing counter 1 and then decrementing it, which is fine. The channel, the counters remained non-negative throughout the path. Whereas this path, your counter is 0 here, you're trying a -1, which would result in a -1, 0. So this path is infeasible in this system. So any path which attempts to make a counter negative is infeasible. And as I mentioned earlier, every feasible path in the original system is also a feasible path in this VCFG, but not the opposite is not necessarily true. Finally, I will briefly introduce data flow analysis. This is my last background section, last slide in the background section. So data flow analysis, normally you're given a control flow graph and you're given abstract values for the variables. So let's say the abstract values are L1 and L2. And L1 and L2, they come from an abstract domain L. So in general, you have a single abstract value for the entire memory. You don't have separate abstract values for the separate variables, but here for simplicity, we are taking it that every variable has its own abstract value. And these FA, FB, these are the abstract transfer functions from this domain L to L. So this is standard data flow analysis terminology. So if you consider this path, and F1 is the composition of FA and FB, and the abstract value here would, at the end of this path, would be F1 applied to L1, L2, because L1, L2 is the initial values in the entry of the path. If you consider this path, F2 is the composition, and the abstract values here would be F2 of L1, L2. And you have to report the least upper bound. So these values come from a lattice. So the least upper bound here is what you finally report, and this is called the join over all paths solution in data flow analysis. So you have to, if you take any point of interest, you have to consider all paths to that point from the entry point and apply the path transfer function on the entry value across every path and join the results and report it. And this is called the join over all paths solution in data flow analysis. In the case of the VCFG, as we know, some paths are feasible and some paths are infeasible. So ideally for precision, we want to only compute the join over all the feasible paths, and we want to ignore the infeasible paths. Because if you consider all the infeasible paths as well, you will get a higher value in the lattice in general, because the least upper bound will go more up in the lattice as you consider more and more infeasible paths, and that results in imprecision in the data flow analysis world. So we want to ignore as many of the infeasible paths as possible. Ideally, we want to ignore all of the infeasible paths. So this is our problem statement. So you don't need to read all this. So what we want to do is for any program point V, we want to consider all feasible paths P from the entry point to V, right? And over all those feasible paths, if PTF of P is the path transfer function of that path, you want to apply the initial value L0 and join all these values. And that is called the join over all feasible path solution, or JOFP. This is contrasted with JOP, which is join over all paths, which is common in the sequential program world. So our problem statement is to compute the JOFP at V. So this paper was actually presented in ESOP, European Symposium on Programming, earlier this year. The paper on this talk is based. So we proposed two algorithms for this problem. One is a backward demand-driven algorithm. It is sound and precise, So what we mean by sound is like common knowledge. It's an over approximation of the true result. And what we mean by precise is it computes the precise JOFP. And there is no imprecision in that regard. Now, of course, some of the infeasible traces in the original system have become feasible in the VCFG. So that imprecision is there. But as far as the VCFG is concerned, we compute the precise JOFP over the VCFG. So this is the first algorithm. One of the, although it gives the precise JOFP, it has a certain limitation in that it does not admit every possible infinite abstract domain of analysis. The lattice has to have a certain property, which is actually that the transfer functions, the lattice of transfer functions have to form a finite height lattice. So I don't have time to define that very clearly, but you can take it that there is a limitation. It does not allow every possible infinite abstract domain. The other algorithm allows any infinite abstract domain practically, but it is only sound. It is not guaranteed to compute the precise JOFP. It can be an over approximation. So in the rest of this presentation, I'm going to present only the backward DFAS algorithm because conceptually it is the more novel and more interesting one. So here is my example I'll use. This is a VCFG, so that's why we don't see two processes separately. This is the composition of both the processes. There is only one counter. So I don't need you to look at all of this at the same time. It may be a little difficult. I'll just take you through the important parts. There is only one counter in this system. There are 4 variables, T, X, Y, Z. So the +1 denotes a message send, and the -1 denotes a message receive. Right? There is one cycle here, and this cycle is a net positive cycle. It has a send operation. It has no receive operations. This cycle is a net receive cycle. It has 3 receive operations and no send operations. Now we can see the question we want to ask from data flow analysis is, let's say we want to use constant propagation, which is a well-known analysis. We want to ask the question, which variables are constant at this node K and which variables may not be constant. So if we consider all possible paths coming here, we will get an imprecise result. Consider this path shown in red, which does not enter this first cycle. This path it brings these values to the node K, but this path is actually infeasible because the counter value would be -2 at the end of this path. There is 1 + 1 here and there are 3 -1s. So this path is actually infeasible. So ideally, we should not even be traversing this path. On the other hand, this path, which iterates this loop twice, is feasible. It brings these values. And this path, which iterates it 3 times, is also feasible. It brings these values. And in fact, every path that iterates this first cycle at least 2 times is feasible. But the interesting point to note is that across all those paths, it so happens that T is 1 and Z is 1 only across all those paths, whereas X and Y don't have constant values. So the precise result we want to report is T and Z are constants and X and Y may not be constant. But if you consider the infeasible paths also, like the one I first showed, even T and Z would not be constant because T and Z both are 0 in that path. So we would like to aim for the higher precision and consider only the feasible paths. Now, obviously, you cannot traverse all possible paths that end at K because there are an infinite number of them. This is true in any data flow analysis setting. One naive solution could be to keep a data flow value for each counter value that is reachable at a point and separate them, keep separate data flow values for each counter value, have a mapping or function from counter values to data flow values. This would be precise, but this would not terminate because the counter values can grow arbitrarily high in this first cycle. And this is the challenge of this. It is not easy to see how to bound the number of paths you traverse and still give a sound solution. And that's the main challenge of this approach, to find a way to bound the number of paths that you visit while guaranteeing a sound solution. The forward DFAS, which I will not present in detail, takes a kind of a somewhat simple solution. imposes an upper bound on the counter values and does an over approximation whenever the counter value goes above that. So I don't want to describe that in detail because it's an over approximation. I will rather describe the backward DFS algorithm, which does not impose any such limits and still terminates. So a key concept in this algorithm is, is called the demand of a path, right? So the demand of a path is the starting counter value that you need to be able to traverse that path. So in this case, if you look at the path from this node that goes all the way to the right, the counter value needs to be 1 in order to clear this decrement, the starting counter value. The counter value here needs to be 2 in order to clear both these decrements, right? And the starting counter value here needs to be 2 as well, because it if you have 2, you will be able to clear, and there's one increment also along the way. So if your counter value is 2 here, you would be able to clear this path. So the demand of a path is the minimum starting counter values or vector of counter values that you need to clear that path. So I'm going to kind of try to present the approach in one slide due to we don't have too much time. So we were interested in finding the JOFP at this node K, right? Now these are some of the paths. So now I'm kind of pretending that node C is the beginning of the program, although actually node A is the beginning of the program, but the idea is similar. So now these are some of the paths that start from the node C and end at node K. So this path visits this first cycle only once. This path visits the first cycle twice, right? It visits the first cycle twice and then goes this way. So this is CDEFG whole square, meaning twice, and then CHIJK, which is this suffix ending at K. So this path visits it 3 times and so on. So these are some of the paths that start at C and end at K, right? They differ only in their iteration count of the first cycle. Obviously, we need to consider also the iteration counts of the second cycle, but for simplicity, I'm kind of ignoring that. The algorithm takes care of all of this. Now, these are the demands of these paths, or the paths shown here. And these are the path transfer functions of these paths. So here I'm using the primed, unprimed notation. What this means is that if you traverse this path, the final value of t would be equal to the initial value of z. So the unprimed values are the initial values when you enter the path, and the primed values are the final values when you leave the path. Now there are an infinite number of such paths. So how do we limit this? What you can see is that this path, if you consider this last path with the paths 3 and 4, the demand of these 2 paths is less than equal to the demand of the 5th path. In fact, they are all equal. And if you join the path transfer functions of these 2 paths, paths 3 and 4, you get this path transfer function, which is saying that t prime is 1, z prime is 1, but x prime and y prime are top, because this path is adding 3 to x and this path is adding 4 to x. So it becomes a non-constant. So x prime is top. Y prime, this is adding 2 and this is adding 3. So y prime is also top, but t prime and x prime both are 1 in both those paths. So this yellow thing is the join of the path transfer functions of paths 3 and 4. So we say that this 5th path is covered by paths 3 and 4. And our definition of covered is that these 2 paths have less than or equal to demand than this path, and the joins of their transfer functions dominates the join of this transfer function in the lattice. And we have proved in the paper that whenever a path is covered by another set of paths which has already been enumerated, you don't have to retain this covered path. You can throw it away. And you can also ignore all paths obtained by further extending this thrown away path in the leftward direction. All paths obtained by extending this path by adding prefixes to it. So we don't need this cycle with 5 iterations. We only need up to 4 iterations. And this is what gives us the bound on what all paths you need to consider in order to obtain the result.
Rajan, sorry to interrupt. You have like 3 more minutes left.
Sure, okay.
Okay.
So that is the overall idea, and I'm going to skip further details of this. In the remaining 3 minutes, I will say a little about evaluation. So we used 14 distributed programs. We took the programs from these these different languages. Right? But in our implementation, we have an XML representation of distributed programs because we wanted to cover all these languages in a simple implementation. So that then we manually translated these 14 programs into this XML representation. We also had to perform some simplifications of the programs. It's mentioned in the paper because we do not handle every feature of all those underlying languages. So all told, we have 14 programs. And let me skip these slides in the interest of time. I'll come directly to this slide. In our implementation, we have 3 modes. One is this forward DFAs, which is our own approach. We use the constant propagation analysis. Then we have the backward DFAs, which is also our approach. In this, we use the LCP or linear constant propagation, which is a simplification of constant propagation, less precise. And we have to use this because, as I mentioned, backward DFAs has some limitations. It does not allow all possible infinite lattices. So we have to use a slightly less precise lattice. The technical reason is there in the paper. However, LCP also is an infinite lattice. We should note that. We also use 2 baseline approaches, which are not our approaches. One is a simple join over all paths, ignoring all the queuing operations, using the full CP lattice. And the other is, this is the closely related work by Majumdar et al. Came about 10-12 years back. And they handle only finite abstract domains. And both CP and LCP are infinite abstract domains. So we used CCP, which is even more simple than LCP, even less precise, but it's a finite abstract domain. So the JOP and the CCP are the 2 baselines for us, whereas the forward and the backward are our 2 approaches. So we did the basically the constant propagation analysis. There were, across all the benchmarks, there were 189 locations where variables were used. These show the number of locations where number of constants found among those uses. So as you can see, both our approaches find many more constants. In other words, are more precise than the baseline approaches. And also, although the forward appears more precise than the backward, even though it is a simpler algorithm, that's not entirely true. Actually, the 2 sets, if you look at them individually, are incomparable. There are some benchmarks where backward DFAs is more precise than the forward DFAs. Now, I mentioned earlier that this computes the precise JOFP, the backward, whereas the forward computes sometimes an over approximation. So then one will wonder why in some benchmarks the forward gives more constants. That is because the forward uses the full CP lattice, whereas the backward is not able to use that lattice. It uses a less precise abstract domain. So in a way, at the end of the day, the 2 are somewhat incomparable, you can say. These are similar numbers for assertions. So these benchmarks had assertions, and we tried to use the constants info to prove the assertions. There were 42 assertions. Again, our approaches verified 50% of the assertions. The baseline, the first baseline, only 4 assertions, and the work of Majumdar et al. 14 assertions. So we are verified significantly more assertions than both the baselines. So I'm going to skip the running time part. Our approach is slower than the other approaches because it's more precise. So the results are there in the paper. This is related work. 3 most closely related works. This was the approach of Majumdar I mentioned. All these approaches admit only finite abstract domains. Ours is the first approach that admits infinite abstract domains like LCP or even CP, and still compute the precise JOFP in the case of the backward approach. So we have obtained, on a strictly bigger class of abstract domains, we have obtained full precision. And that is the contribution of this work for analysis of distributed systems. So I will conclude with this conclusion slide. I will not read it out, and I will answer any questions if there is time. So Supratik has raised his hand.
Yeah, Supratik, please.
Yeah. Great talk, Raghavan. So I just wanted to check. You mentioned that there are some limitations of the infinite abstract domains.
Right.
If you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
So the main restriction is that if you consider the lattice of transfer functions, which is the L to L lattice, that lattice has to be finite height for that backward JFP algorithm. So the normal assumption is that the underlying lattice L is a finite height, or if it's infinite height, you have a widening operation. At this point, we don't admit any of those. We are not able to yet. It is future work. So we need the L arrow L, the lattice of transfer functions, to be of finite height. But L can be infinite itself.
And the ordering of such transfer functions is defined pointwise, is it?
Yeah, it's pointwise ordering. Yeah. So for every x, f1 of x should be less than equal to f2 of x. Yeah.
I see. So okay. And where exactly did this come in useful? I mean, where exactly was this crucially important?
Yeah, it is very crucial because the notion of coverage, if you remember, we extend paths in the backward direction from that node of the query node, the node where we want to compute points. And in order to guarantee that you will terminate, you will need that the path transfer functions form a finite height lattice. Otherwise, there is no guarantee that you will eventually find that every path is covered by some smaller paths, which come below it.
So it looks like what you really need is that all paths are finite, right? Which is all paths in this lattice of functions are finite.
The paths are infinite in nature because of cycles.
No. By paths, I mean in the lattice. In the lattice, the
height. The height has to be finite. The number of different points in that function lattice need not be finite, but the height has to be finite.
Yeah. So if I could abuse the term and use paths as a chain in the lattice, let me use chain in the lattice.
Oh, okay.
So what you probably need is that every chain in the lattice of these transfer functions should be finite.
Correct.
So this does not imply that the lattice is of finite height. I mean, I could.
That is also true. Yes, you're right.
Right. So it's.
No, it does. So it is not bounded height, but it's still finite height.
Yes. Any path you choose is of finite height.
Correct.
There is a path of every length. There's a chain of every length.
That is also okay. Yeah, that's also okay.
That should also be okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Any quick question? Okay. So then let's all thank the speaker. Thank you, Raghavan, for the wonderful talk.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I apologize for the stupid trouble in the beginning.
Thank you.